This week, we've been able to announce that we have someone joining our team as youth coordinator, because we've got an opportunity at the moment where one of our youth coordinators is going on maternity leave, and we've been able to select and appoint a new person in post. She and I met this week, and afterwards, after our first meeting, I realised that I had forgotten to tell her something. Forgotten lesson number 1. This is a lesson I've told everyone I've ever worked alongside, whether they've been interns or employees or any kind of staff. I wonder if you can guess what it is. Hopefully any of them can tell you what lesson number 1 is. Lesson number 1 is learn how to say no. And even more difficult, learn how to say no, not just to bad things, but also often to good things. You see, it's easy to say no to things you don't want to do. But the reality is there's loads of things that people will ask you to do, loads of things that you may want to do, and lots of those are actually good things, but no one, no matter who they are, no one can do everything well. Every extra thing any of us takes on to do is one other thing that we will do less well. Something will suffer. And maybe, well, definitely we will suffer. So lesson number 1 is learn how to say no. I even give folk I work with an excuse. I say, look, just say, Tony told you to say no. To say no at the start, say maybe I'll try it or I'll see what it is, but do not agree to it. Learn how to say no. You see, for me, life is about not doing more and more things. It's about doing less, but doing that well. One of the things that can help in learning how to say no is knowing who you are and what you were asked to do or what you were made to do. Together, we're looking together at a story that's collected in a book we call Luke, in this collection of books we call the Bible, and it's about a man called Jesus of Nazareth. He lived about 2,000 years ago. He operated in first century Palestine. He caused such a stir that even those who are his opponents in history or experts will agree that he operated and he changed history, whether he was who he said he was or even who his followers say he was. He completely changed history in a way no one else has. Luke tells us in chapter 4 about this Jesus of Nazareth travelling to a place called Capernaum. There's been a sort of a riot in his home village in Nazareth, and he's wandering around and he's been teaching, telling people, interpreting particularly their scriptures, and he's been gathering people together, or they've been gathering together in the places they're gathering places called synagogues, and he's been teaching, and he's caused a stir because the way he's teaching is remarkable. Most teachers in his time, or rabbis, taught based on other people's opinions. Such and such said about this, such and such said about this. Very rarely did people say, I think, or this is the case. Instead, Jesus is really direct. He says, here is what I'm talking about, and I tell you this. Doesn't have to rely on anyone else's opinion, which is really unusual for the time, and it's causing a stir. He's gaining a reputation. On one Sabbath, which is their Saturday, in this situation, a man starts screaming as if, Luke tells us, possessed by a demon. Now, some of us will look at this stories like it, and look at some of the symptoms and say, well, this looks like it might actually just be a form of epilepsy, or maybe it's some form of mental illness that people may not have been able to understand at that point. And who's to say that's not the case? However, in the entirety of these stories and in an awful lot of people's experience, the scriptures take seriously that there are forces, unseen forces at work in the world, working against what God is doing. Powers, demons, spirits, lots of names for this opposition. And it seems that this kind of story is less worried about the details than the effects. This was a problem for the man and for his community. This demon or disease is harming him. And on top of this, Luke adds that this demon seems to have some sort of insight, seems to know who Jesus is, and he's playing with his listeners, Luke, because already in his story he's set out that Jesus is no ordinary man. He's a human being, but he's also somehow son of God and connected to this idea of a Messiah and more. And it's something we, the listeners, know. It's something the demon knows, but the people Jesus is speaking to in the synagogue, they don't know yet. Jesus, at this point, doesn't do what an awful lot of people in his situation who dealt with demons or illnesses of the time would have done. He doesn't use any fancy phrases. He doesn't wave a wand. He doesn't pass around a hat for donations. Instead, he just, again, simply commands something to stop. The problem is dealt with without any fuss. For free, the man is healed, but more restored. He's unharmed. Jesus gets things done. He doesn't just teach things, he does things. Jesus has actually just come from Nazareth. And there he upset people as he quoted from one of their prophets. And he claimed he was the key person who God was using to bring good news to set the captives free. And here, of course, Jesus is setting a captive free, releasing this man from whatever gets in the way. And then straight away, Luke tells us another story, this time more obviously about disease, about a relative of Simon, and Simon later on we'll find out is nicknamed Peter. His relative is suffering and she is healed. And notice that once she's healed, she could then get on with her work, which happened to be looking after hospitality in her house. Some folk joke that Jesus just healed her because he was hungry, but that's to miss the point. We were told in the Greek that Luke writes that she gets up so that she can serve. And the words are actually, she is raised, she's resurrected so she can serve. And that's the bigger picture of the Jesus story, getting rid of everything that's in the way so that people can do the things they were made for. In Luke's story then, things get a lot busier towards sunset. Any ideas why? Well, it's the Jewish Sabbath. You can't work on the Jewish Sabbath. You can't do anything. It's the day of rest. And so you can't carry your friends who are ill to the local teacher or healer until it's dark. Work can begin again when the sun goes down. And so when the sun goes down, lots of people take their friends, their relatives to Jesus, and there's an awful lot of restoration seems to go on. One of the unusual things in this story for any kind of Jewish situation is that he laid his hands on them. Doesn't mention that in any of the Jewish scriptures or any other kind of practice we know about. One of my favourite writers talks about how the real miracle in a lot of Jesus' healing stories is not so much that Jesus healed the problems of the people, but that he touched them. He recognised them. He saw them when they were so often excluded by their sickness. Maybe it's hard for us to imagine a situation where people are afraid to go near each other or touch each other or strangers or sick people in case they get infected or catch the sickness. Then in Luke's story, Jesus tries to take some time out. A Sabbath of his own, if you like, a rest. He tries to get some space away by himself, and he seems to do that a lot in these stories. He's a man who takes time out, and he's a man who needs to pray. But the crowd find him, and they tell him that they have a great idea about what he should do next, that he should stay, he should set up business here. There's so many people to help and teach and heal. Well, what was lesson number 1 again? Learn how to say no. That's not my great piece of wisdom. That's a truth that's baked into creation itself. It's baked into these scriptures, and it's something that Jesus knew about himself. He said no. He said, there's good work to be done in this place, but I have to say no. I have to, he says, proclaim the good news about something he calls the kingdom of God to other towns. And that's why I was sent. That is why I was sent. Who does he think he is? Well, Jesus of Nazareth seems to know who he is and what he has to do. His time is limited. He has a task, he has a project, he's a movement, he has a calling into that. He is teaching, he is demonstrating something that he calls good news, something he calls the kingdom of God. What does that mean? Well, maybe the best definition I can think of is what Jesus does. Because what Jesus does reveals who God is and what God is up to. The life and death and resurrection of Jesus reveals what God's project is all about, and that is what the kingdom of God is. It's where God is at work. It's where things are going the way God intends. It's God's movement in action, and the best, the clearest, the most obvious way to see that, to understand that, is to look and to see what Jesus does. And then to join in. And it's simple in so many ways. Good news for the poor, release for the captives, understanding for the blind, healing and wholeness for those who need it. Jesus knew and lived and demonstrated that he didn't come to do everything. He did come to change everything, but not to do everything. And we, each of us, were made to have our part to play in that.